The flashing red and blue lights lit up my front yard like it was a crime scene, and for a split second, I genuinely thought something terrible had happened. I hadn't even made it halfway down my driveway when I heard her voice again. Sharp, loud, confident in the way only someone who has never been told no can be. That's him. That's the one. The wheelchair. I stopped, my hands resting on the controls of my electric wheelchair, feeling my stomach tighten. I already knew who she was before I turned around. Everyone in the neighborhood did. The HOA's self-appointed enforcer, the woman who treated bylaws like federal law, and herself like the judge. She was standing beside the patrol car, arms crossed, chin lifted, pointing at me like I was a suspect instead of a homeowner trying to get his mail. That wheelchair is illegal, she told the officer. It violates HOA regulations and city codes. He's driving it on the road like a vehicle. I looked at the officer, then back at her, wondering how we had gotten here, how a medical device had somehow turned into a police matter. This hadn't started with the police. It never does. It started weeks earlier, the first time she saw me using my electric wheelchair to go down the sidewalk toward the mailbox. I remember her slowing her SUV, staring like she'd spotted a stray animal. The next day, there was a printed notice taped to my door. No official letterhead. No signature, just bold text warning me about unauthorized motorized devices. I ignored it. That's when the notes started piling up. Complaints about noise. Complaints about appearance. Complaints claiming I was operating machinery in common areas. I kept every single one. Then she escalated. One afternoon, she stood in the middle of the sidewalk and blocked my path. She told me I needed a permit. She said electric wheelchairs weren't allowed outdoors. She said I should be considerate and stay on my property. I asked her if she was serious. She smiled and said, "Don't make me call the police." And now here they were. The officer knelt slightly to be at eye level with me. He asked calmly, "Sir, do you mind explaining what's going on?" Before I could speak, she cut in again. "He's endangering residents. That thing goes fast. Children play here. I've warned him multiple times." I felt something shift inside me, not anger yet, but something colder. A realization that this wasn't ignorance. This was control. I explained that the wheelchair was medically prescribed, that I used it to move around my neighborhood, that it complied with federal law, that it was no different than a mobility aid. She scoffed. Loudly, "That doesn't matter. HOA rules come first here." The officer paused at that. I could see it in his face. The moment he realized this wasn't the emergency she had made it sound like. He asked her if she had documentation proving the wheelchair was illegal. She waved her phone. "I have videos." "And the bylaws?" He asked to see them. She hesitated. That hesitation was the first crack, because what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this wasn't just about a wheelchair, and it definitely wasn't about HOA rules. By the time this was over, she was going to learn that calling the police doesn't automatically put you in charge of the situation, and that accusing the wrong person can turn your little power trip into a very public mistake. The officer asked her again, this time more firmly, if she could show anything that proved the wheelchair violated city or state law. She flipped through her phone like she was scrolling for proof that didn't exist, muttering under her breath about special rules and community standards. Every second that passed made the situation feel more uncomfortable for her and calmer for me. I reached into the small pouch attached to my wheelchair and pulled out a folder I had learned to keep with me for moments exactly like this. Inside were copies of my medical prescription, the manufacturer's compliance sheet, and a printed section of the Americans with Disability Act that specifically addressed mobility devices in residential areas. I handed it to the officer without a word. He read it carefully, slowly, thoroughly. While he was reading, she tried to regain control by raising her voice. She started talking about how I was using the street like a racetrack and how she was protecting the neighborhood. She even claimed she had received multiple complaints, though she never named who they were from. The officer looked up and asked her a simple question. "Ma'am, are you saying you're trying to enforce HOA rules through the police?" She didn't like that question. She said the HOA had the authority to call law enforcement when someone was breaking rules. The officer explained patiently but clearly that HOA rules were not criminal law and that mobility devices were protected under federal statutes. He added that calling the police over a legally permitted medical device could be considered misuse of emergency services. That's when her confidence started to crack. She tried a new angle. She said she felt threatened. She said the wheelchair was intimidating. She said she was scared I might lose control and hurt someone. The officer looked at me, then at the wheelchair, then back at her. "Ma'am," he said, "this device moves slower than a jogging pace." A couple of neighbors had gathered by then, standing on their lawns, pretending not to watch while very clearly watching. I could feel the shift in the air. This was no longer her moment. The second officer arrived and pulled the first aside. They spoke quietly for a minute. When they came back, the tone had changed completely. They told her that I was not in violation of any law, that my wheelchair was legally protected, that I was allowed to use sidewalks and roads where pedestrians were permitted. They also informed her that further harassment could result in a formal complaint. Her face went red. She snapped that she would take this higher. She said the HOA lawyer would be involved. She said this wasn't over. The officer asked her for her ID. That stopped her cold. He explained that because she had made repeated accusations and escalated the situation unnecessarily, they needed to document the call. He also warned her that false reports could carry consequences. She tried to argue. She tried to talk over him, but he didn't budge. I sat there quietly, hands resting on the armrests, listening as she realized she wasn't the one in control anymore. When the officers finally turned back to me, they apologized for the disturbance. One of them even asked if I needed help getting back inside. I told them I was fine. As they left, she stood there alone on the sidewalk, clutching her phone like it had betrayed her. And I knew then this wasn't the end. Because someone like her doesn't back down when they're wrong, they double down. And next time, she wouldn't just want me warned. She'd want me gone. The HOA didn't wait long to try again. 2 days after the police left, a certified letter showed up at my door, stating that I was in violation of community safety standards and demanding I stop using my electric wheelchair in all shared areas immediately. The letter warned of daily fines and possible legal action. It was signed by the same one who had pointed at me like a criminal in my own driveway. This time, I didn't panic. I forwarded the letter straight to a disability rights attorney. Less than a week later, the HOA received a formal response citing federal law, state law, and multiple court cases that made one thing painfully clear. What they were doing was illegal. Not questionable, illegal. The letter demanded that all harassment stop immediately and warned that any continued action would trigger a discrimination lawsuit. The HOA folded almost overnight. The fines were withdrawn. The warning letters stopped. A new notice went out to residents reminding them that mobility devices are protected and that harassment would not be tolerated. The woman who had called the police stopped making eye contact with me entirely. No apology ever came, but it didn't need to. Because every time I roll down that sidewalk now, I do it knowing something important changed. Not just for me, but for anyone else who might have been too afraid to stand up before. And that wheelchair she called illegal, it turned out to be the thing that finally put the HOA back in its place.